the Russian frozen central bank assets, the sovereign assets, to the tune of 210 million euros, which are mostly lodged in the European service company Euroclear, and which the Europeans want to immobilize and use to collateralize for loans to support the Ukrainian budget for the next 3 to 5 years. The US have, in discussions with the Russians, suggested that this money should be poured into US-led investment funds that would then conduct, business operations together between the Americans and the Russians.
Now, the latest coalition of the willing meetings taking place this afternoon with President Zelensky and European leaders discussing peace proposals aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump isn't attending. He says he doesn't want to waste time on talks. Russia has yet to properly respond, but has repeatedly turned down similar ideas as unacceptable. Constanze Stelzenmuller is director of the Center on the United States and Europe at the Brookings Institution think tank in Washington and joins us now. Constanze, thank you for your time. What do we know about the latest form of the deal that the coalition of the willing are looking at?
Hi there. Thank you for having me on. And it's Stelzenmuller, Constance. But that's all right. Almost nobody outside of my own country gets it right.
I'm so sorry. Thank you for the correction.
And no, that's all right. It's part of the course, I can tell you. But we know very little, frankly, about the form of these deals. So I think we should be quite careful in speculating about them. My sense is that there were separate conversations going on between the Americans and the Ukrainians, between the Americans and the Russians, and the Europeans and the Ukrainians. And none of this is firm yet. I mean, it's sort of like an electron cloud with the electrons zipping around inside them. And we are far from being able to say where this is going to land.
So Donald Trump says these talks risk wasting time. What are they achieving? We know that hopefully at some point it is diplomacy that will help formulate the end to this invasion. Is it a waste of time? Sorry, it sounds like a crass question, but what do you think is being achieved in these talks?
Well, it's a truism, isn't it? I mean, diplomacy always ends wars. The problem here, I think, is the question whether all the actors engaged in diplomacy are acting in good faith. And there is considerable reason to think that they are not. That begins with the Russians, and it is not entirely clear that some of the interests of the US negotiations aren't, shall we say, predatory.
What do you mean?
I mean by that, for example, that the Russian frozen central bank assets, the sovereign assets, to the tune of 210 million euros, which are mostly lodged in the European service company Euroclear, and which the Europeans want to immobilize and use to collateralize for loans to support the Ukrainian budget for the next 3 to 5 years. The US have, in discussions with the Russians, suggested that this money should be poured into US-led investment funds that would then conduct, business operations together between the Americans and the Russians. Also, keep in mind that the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov keeps saying that Russia's security interests are not fully addressed, by which he means the Russian veto power over Europe's security architecture and the role of NATO in Europe and America's role in it.
There have been, and you allude to it there, sort of warmer relations between the US and Russia than President Zelensky is comfortable. And Zelensky is repeatedly the subject of criticism, very pointed public criticism from the US President Donald Trump, of whether that's being not grateful enough for US support. We obviously saw what happened nearly a year ago now in the Oval Office in February. What do you think is President Zelensky's best strategy in getting a deal that is for his own country's interests, that the US and Russia will ultimately say we can sign off on this?
Honestly, I'm not quite sure that that's available, right? And that's even on the menu. I don't think it's on the menu for the Russians. What the Russians want is something that for Ukraine would be suicidal, which is territorial concessions, including the fortress belt in the Donbass, which would, if ceded to Russia, whether de facto or de jure, would mean that the the Russians would have, if they sort of reconstituted their efforts, have a fairly easy and unopposed route into central Ukraine and towards the capital. That's not something Ukraine can afford doing. And let's keep in mind here that the Ukrainians have made all possible concessions at this point, including offering to hold national elections. Right? So in reality, I mean, let me put this to you very bluntly. What the Ukrainians and the Europeans are doing here is sort of trying to make it clear by being constructive, by offering solutions, that it is the Russians who are maximalist, and to show that it is the Russians who are being uncooperative, unconstructive, and maximalist in their demands, and that this for the Kremlin, it is not just about peace and stopping the invasion, but also about a veto right over European security, which is not something that Europeans, and I would imagine the British, are willing to concede.
What can Ukraine's allies best do to bolster the cause of Ukraine?
Well, one of the things that they're doing right now is attempting to mobilize the 210 billion, European, I'm sorry, let me start over. It's a lot going on this week here in Washington. The Europeans are holding a summit next week on the 18th, where the key subject on the menu, besides overall support of Ukraine, will be immobilizing Russian sovereign assets in Europe. And they are planning to use for that emergency powers, which would mean overriding the very probable Hungarian veto. As we know, Hungary is the European member state that is closest to the Kremlin, and that has again and again refused to support Ukraine in any way, and has vetoed or attempted to veto European financial and other support.
Constance, thank you very much for your time and what you describe as, yes, an extremely busy week in Washington, but for the update, as we believe that meeting is currently underway right now. So if anything material changes or we get an update or a statement, we'll bring it to you here on Times Radio. That's Constance, the transatlantic policy expert. Thank you.
It's really a beautiful thing to watch. So great for our country.
And you spoke to some European leaders today, I think, sir.
I did.
Could you tell us about that? And is there a new revised peace plan that Ukraine has presented?
Yeah. The leaders of France we spoke to, and Germany, and UK, all very good leaders, very good friends of mine. And we discussed Ukraine in pretty strong words. And we'll see what happens. I mean, we're waiting to hear answers before we progress. You know, we're not spending any money in Ukraine. We're selling basically missiles and everything else to NATO, and NATO is paying us, and then they distribute it to who they want. I guess they're mostly distributing to Ukraine, but we're not spending money. But you know what we are? We're spending a lot of time and a lot of effort, and let it be much, much bigger, much, much better. And you know, growth doesn't mean inflation.
Say very strong terms, sir. Could you explain that?
Well, I think we had some little disputes about people, and we're going to see how it turns out. And we said before we go to a meeting, we want to know some things. You know, they would like us to go to a meeting over the weekend in Europe, and we'll make a determination depending on what they come back with. We don't want to be wasting time. Sometimes you have to let people fight it out, and sometimes you don't. But the problem with letting people fight it out is you're losing thousands of people a week. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Mr. President,
they're always afraid that, if we have, and if there is inflation, that's okay, then we can slow it down.
and when you say that the European leaders want to have a meeting over the weekend, are you talking about with Zelensky or with them?
With Zelensky and us.
And you said in an interview yesterday that you think it's time for Zelensky to start accepting things. What things are you talking about?
I think he has to be realistic, and I do wonder about, how long is it going to be till they have an election? It's democracy. It's a long time. They haven't had an election in a long time. It's losing a lot of people. And it's possible that the people, if you look at the polls, I will say 82%, there was a poll that came out, 82% of the people are demanding a settlement be made, Ukrainian people. They want to see a settlement be made. I understand that. They're losing thousands and thousands of people a week. They want to see it ended. And I do say, at what point, when do they have an election in Ukraine? That's not casting dispersions on anybody, but they do have a massive corruption situation going on there. And they do say, when are they, people are asking this question, when do they have an election? Are they going to have an election? Or are they going to just keep it going like this? So I think it's time to get that war settled. And I think it's a war that can be settled. But it takes two to tango. Now it's when you announce good results, Michael, the market goes down because they say, oh, that means things are good, that means we're going to kill it.